So now that we have all the three authors here, I'm going to kickstart think who you guys are so you know who's on the call with you. So let me start with Balveen. Balveen is here. She has Indo-Fijian roots, which I think is super interesting for me to learn. And for people who don't know, she grew up speaking Hindi as well as one of the languages. And, she has a multicultural household and she has a child. And so that, I guess, was some of the inspiration that led her to release a bilingual book. It's called Chalo Jungle Chalein. And it has a very interesting element of being written in, it is written in Roman alphabet, like an English alphabet. So children are able to access that information easily, especially children who are growing outside of, a Hindi speaking country. There it is. She has this book right in front. So for everyone to see. Yeah. So really, really amazing. The next I have on my screen, I'm going by whoever is coming up on my screen first. I have Shachi Kaushik. She's a local Austin author. She's here in Round Rock in Texas, and she spends half a year in Calgary, Canada, and half a year in Austin. I was just telling her she's come to a heat storm, but hopefully we'll have better weather for her now in winter. And the other thing I love about Shachi is that, we connected like very organically. I found her on Instagram. She writes a lot. She reviews picture books. I always see her on Austin South Asian for people who are local and they know. I see her articles there. She also published her book, Diwali in My New Home, which, as you can judge from the title, is about the immigrant experience a little bit and describes the festival. She also works here with libraries. She's done audio videos. She has YouTube channels. She's really committed to the cause of helping people raise bilingual kids. And she comes from Uttarakhand, which I'm really excited about because we were just there in Dehradun and had her book showcased in our festival as well. So welcome, Shachi. And the third author I have here is Dushyant Wadivkar, who just debuted his first children's book. It's called Toodle 2. And it's kind of like it's an interesting title because Toodle 2 is basically 2020 is embedded in the title. It talks about immigrant parenting experiences within the pandemic. And, there are few people who talk about how hard the pandemic was for parents who were raising small kids. And this book has an additional perspective that we hardly talk about, that it is so much worse for anyone who was an immigrant and didn't have families right next to them. And also from a South Asian diaspora. Here I want to also acknowledge, I literally have done these panels now, several of them throughout this year. This is the first time I have a male children's book author, which is so rare in our industry. So I love having that kind of diversity. And so welcome here. I will not forget, all of you guys have other jobs as well. Balveen, I know you work in technology. Dushyant works in automotive. And Shachi, I know she began as a lawyer. So she also has a different background. A lot of you have sort of landed into writing in different ways. So this is who these authors are. Let me quickly get into it. We have a lot of parenting and helping topics that I'm hoping to discuss, as you guys have sort of dipped your toes into these topics already. So I'm going to actually start with Dushyant. The book that he showed, Toodle 2, is actually published by our imprint, by Peerbagh. And I wanted to check with you that, there's a discussion we had when this book was being made, that how much Indianness should this book have? Because, should it talk about the American experience or should it talk about the Indian experience, or how much should it have Indian words? And I remember, as a publisher, I had a different perspective. I was a little bit pushy, saying you need to have more Indianness in the book. Talk to us about what you were thinking creatively. How do you introduce this topic to a child?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on your panel, Upasna. So I think now that you asked me this question, I think the hardness of parenting was not unique to being Indian, right? So I saw it in two dimensions. I thought any parent who's going with a small toddler whose daycare is closed, both parents are working, if I think in those terms, it has nothing to do with your nationality or where you come from or your ethnicity or your background, right? It's just hard. All toddlers are equally nasty at that age, I think. But I do think that the Indianness aspect comes from the fact that our parents are not here, right? So we don't have family. We have friends, of course, but that's not the same as family. And I often notice that, my colleagues at work would often literally just dump their toddlers and then, take some time out or just have a day to themselves. And we just didn't have that luxury, right? We were afraid of having somebody come over in the pandemic times. and our nearest relative was 8,000 miles away. So I think that's where I think, if anything, the immigrant aspect comes in. I'm not sure if it's Indian. I happen to be Indian, so that's why it became Indian. But I think that's how I saw it in two dimensions. One is parenting was default hard, no matter where you came from. So that's why I was hesitant to just make it an Indian affair. But I do think the fact that our grandparents were not close by had to play a role in the book as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, it's like by default, kids who are born to communities like ours tend to have like a dual identity. The parent has a dual identity and the child has this unique identity as well. So I'm going to transfer over to you, Balveen. I know there's a multicultural household here. So how do you maintain that balance, and what's a tip for a parent even? Because there are different identities at play. There are so many different cultural backgrounds that you're exposing your child to by default. Like they didn't choose it. They were born in that kind of an atmosphere. You might want to unmute.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
there we
yeah.
go. So I'm Indo-Fijian. I was born in Fiji, moved to the US when I was young, and my husband is American. So we have a half Indo-Fijian, half American daughter who's 3. Dushyant totally understand the toddler stage and the craziness. I'm going through it. And yeah, in our household, it's very interesting because we live in the US where, the American culture is dominant. So it really takes a concerted effort to incorporate parts of Indian culture, my upbringing, right? And figure out ways to integrate that into our day-to-day and celebrate the festivals. There's no blueprint, but I think it's challenging, but also a great opportunity because we get to decide how to, new ways to celebrate the parts that we want to keep and celebrate, and maybe some of the aspects that we want to leave behind. So it is, it's exciting and then challenging. And the way that I am kind of learning how to do it all is really by connecting with other folks going on the same journey. Being a South Asian children's book author has connected me to the whole South Asian kidlit community, and speaking to other parents who are also kind of dealing with the same struggles and trying to do what's best for their children and keeping that connection to their roots alive. So that's been really encouraging.
That's very interesting. And you said something I'm going to pick on because, some of the things that it's really hard as a parent. And I often hear this exact statement, and I experience it as a parent, that it feels like we are doing so much, but there isn't much time. So I feel that we always need extra hands. Or a community, which sometimes is difficult to cultivate because you may not have like a community you grew up with if you grew up in a different place to begin with. And I know that Shachi here, she's volunteered at the library, she's done storytelling sessions, and she creates a lot of resources for parents, like parents here. So Shachi, tell us, like, what have you heard from parents and what got you into this like, sort of a mission, and what are some of the things parents should sort of look at?
So I don't have kids, but how I got started into it because of the Round Rock Public Library, where I was hosting bilingual Hindi-English story time. And when I was picking up books at that time, there weren't many books that represented the South Asian community. And I really wanted to bring that forward. And I'm so happy now that there are books, there are shows being made with a South Asian character. I know in Meera the Royal Detective, that's an animated show, they've consciously made sure that each element of Indian culture is there, and like introducing kids to festivals like Diwali, Eid, Holi. I think the community overall, like the media industry and the publishing industry, is taking that conscious effort to bring it forward for the kids. And my thing was, when I started, there weren't books, but when I did my first Diwali event at the Round Rock Public Library, it wasn't just the South Asian community coming out, it was the everybody from the Round Rock area coming out to experience what the holiday feels like. And the reason I wrote that book is because every year that event just grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And just to see the smile on everybody's faces, especially the little ones, when they come over and they wear the sari, they put on the bindi, and they do the tandia, I just felt that they should know what Diwali is all throughout the world. That's the reason I wrote that book, and I got into picture book writing, because there's so much to tell. It's just not, the South Asian community is just not about the samosas. It's much more than that.
Yeah, no, and very interesting. So, I've been in touch with, like, we do a program with the Austin Public Library here in South Austin beginning September 28th. And I want to actually touch on what Shachi said. This is not just for South Asian kids. It's for any child who's interested. And because you mentioned Diwali, I would say that, I think this year, New York City has a public holiday on Diwali. And obviously that impacts all children. And so all of them want to know what can they do, because it's a new holiday that they may not have celebrated before. And so, intentionally trying to make that information accessible to children is critical. And, about accessibility, Balveen, tell us what you were going through when you were writing your book. I know that it has different scripts in it, or, you chose to write Hindi and English. So what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, so my book it's written in the Hindi script, in Hindi transliteration, and English. And the reason why I chose to incorporate all three is because I myself, I'm not fluent in reading the Hindi script. And so I wanted a book that I could read myself in Hindi to my daughter. And then also my husband is American. He does not speak Hindi, does not, of course, read Hindi. And so I wanted him to be able to learn Hindi himself, right, by reading it to our daughter, and be able to be engaged in the language with us. When speaking teaching a language, especially if both partners are not, fluent in the language, it can be daunting if it feels like it's all on me to teach this language. And so I really wanted to include my husband and make him feel a part of the language teaching process with our daughter. And so that's why I decided to include all three. And there's such a large Hindi speaking and South Asian diaspora in the US. And I know a lot of other parents and caretakers who can relate. And so wanted to make a resource available for them.
Yeah, I really like it, because I feel like even with my child, the reason I want him to learn Hindi is because so that he can appreciate films with me. Like, it's such a small thing, but it matters to me. And I don't expect him to learn Devanagari. So he's typically going to read something which is written in English that he's able to then read, because he won't go to school to learn another script, at least unless he decides to major in it somehow and gets interested. And, I'm going to come to Dushyant, because he has several languages at home. So do you feel sometimes the pressure of having to teach your child the language you grew up on? How does that feel as a parent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my wife doesn't speak the language I speak, which is, a positive, because we can't really get mad at each other, because I really can't use the words I want to. But I think for my son, I really would love for him to speak my native language, which is Marathi. English is default, given that we live in Austin, Texas. Or maybe American is default. Maybe English is still optional. And I think Hindi, I mean, we travel. This is a language I think he should know. And then I know personally German. So I think 4 languages is my goal for my son, but maybe we start off with Hindi and Marathi first, or Kashmiri, which is also a language we use in our family. So many languages, I don't know how to approach it, but I think having the ability to talk to your grandparents is probably how you prioritize that language speaking, and then English is taken care of. So everything else like French, German it'll be optional now, as long as we get the grandparent communication established.
Yeah, and I think that's not uncommon. Somehow in the US, it feels harder. I have to say this. We used to live in Germany, and it's very common there to have parents who could be Ukrainian, Russian, and there are already 4 languages. The child is speaking in Ukrainian to mom, Russian to dad, learning German and English in school. So children are multilingual very frequently there. And it's the same way, if you grew up in any South Asian culture, you are typically speaking more than one language. But the idea of having so many languages here somehow just feels harder unless you have a community around you. And so, there are two books, like there are two languages mentioned in Doodle Doo, which is the book that Dushyant just published, which is Kashmiri and Marathi. So I guess it's kind of like, it's a small line there because it's a kid's book. It's for 3 to 8 years, and they will
And
read
there is
it.
German as well. There's one word called kaput, which my son really likes.
Yeah.
There's a deliberate German in there too.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, there is a deliberate attempt, and I think for me, I guess not having those in like air quotes, but in actually just using these words and starting small is what I think helps kids get exposed. And Shachi, I'm going to come to you now because I know you do a little more than just, or a lot more than just storybooks. I know that you also have a YouTube channel. Have you seen more success with kids using video? Because that's something I've always wanted to know as a parent. Like, is that a good learning channel for them?
So for the media, if they're on their tablets 24 hours, that's bad. Parents should know how to control the media. And most of the videos that the kids are watching should be interactive. That's what I've learned, that the more the parent and the kid can sit down together and can interact with the video, say if the person is saying count the object. If you go see my video channel, Happy Hindi Learners, I'm doing activities with them, telling them if it's a counting activity to go count their books or their toys. And when they sit down with their parents, they can just go and do that activity. So it's kind of that interactive go-viewing activities that parents should encourage kids to be watching on television. And of course, when they're older, there are shows like Meera the Royal Detective. I think they do a really good job introducing kids to the South Asian culture. But now that it's becoming so diverse, the media industry is trying to make sure they're having characters that represent people from different communities. So if it won't be the lead character, you might see a side character. So they might connect. Picking up shows, picking up books which your kids can relate to. And parents obviously need to make sure they're I don't know how YouTube Kids is different, YouTube is different. You have to put timers and all. So parents should put that restriction on the kids. And I would say it's not only the parent, the kids that it should be a restriction. The parents also, they shouldn't be using their phones 24 hours in front of the kids, because if you're not interacting with your kid, the kid only thinks the tablet is the best friend where they can get the support, and that's the best friend they have. So the parents need to put down their electronics, and they need to build up activities where they're interacting more, maybe taking walks together, going for hikes, doing activities in the kitchen. That way, you're growing a bond together. And the best thing I think you can do for your kid is plan a visit to the library, pick up books together. And when they're picking up books, be a part of it. And when they come back, sit down, read with them, and create it if you can't do it like a daily activity, even if you do it as a weekly activity, it'll help grow the bond between you and your child.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, library visits are my absolute favorite things to do with my child. I feel like very connected and in my element when I'm doing that. For anyone who is into writing. But, I do want to call out something. I feel like, Shachi works in the media industry, so she's seeing a lot of this work come across. But if we look at aggregate statistics, those are not very positive still, because even like from 2 years ago, the stats that we know is 70% of lead characters here in the United States or North America typically will feature white characters as leads or animals as leads. So it's actually not as diverse as we think, because this is a bubble, right? We are all looking at our books and we are looking at the South Asian kid-lit community. So you see a lot more, but actually for the parent, it's like an aggregate statistic is not very high. And so that actually brings me to this perspective on, should children be exposed only to South Asian, or how do you sort of strike that balance? Because they are growing up in a different country. So how do you sort of make that balance? And Dushyant, I see you nodding. So I'm going to go to you. I know you have a strong perspective on this one.
I really do. And I think it comes from the fact that I grew up in a small city, which is probably the most beautiful city in India, Nashik. And I grew up consistently from 0 to probably 18 when I left for Pune. And I have such strong roots in that city. Like I feel instantly at home. I have friends, family. I mean, I never get lost there. I can never get lost there. I can always get home. These intense bonds with the city only happens if you kind of immerse yourself in that growing experience. And yes, we moved to Bangalore for a while, and that was a bit of an adventure as well. But fundamentally, my roots are in the city, and I would love for my son to kind of have that feeling, and not have the feeling that I currently have, because I moved to then the US, and I lived in Germany. We moved within the US, so now I feel kind of homeless and at home everywhere, and that's also a powerful feeling. But I think growing up, it's important to have roots, and not have confusing roots. So of course we can have, I think they have tremendous bandwidth, right? I think we're being overprotective. I think kids can learn many languages, they can learn different perspectives, they can learn different cultures, but they should have some grounding, is my belief, because I have benefited from it. I still benefit from it. I know exactly where I come from, and I would love to kind of give that to my son as well.
Yeah, and Balveen, you were nodding here because I feel like, again, this is probably coming back to a similar question I asked you before, that how do you balance between what, as your child grows up, they might start having these strong feelings about this is, who I am. And how do you still, as a child, what is your understanding of how would you encourage them still to be open to what you're trying to share?
Yeah, so I guess my experience is unique in a sense that I spent most of my childhood and adult life in the US. And back in the 80s, 90s, when I was growing up, I didn't see any representation of South Asians or language in any of the media, any of the books that I read. And that led to me being oftentimes ashamed, embarrassed to share my culture, my language. I remember being so embarrassed when my parents would pick me up from school and they were speaking in Hindi. And my goal for my daughter is I want her to be proud, right? I want her to be proud of who she is. I want her to be able to share who she is with others who aren't South Asian, be able to speak about her language, her food, her cultural, traditions, and be excited and proud of it, and give her the language to be able to explain those things to other people. That's something that I didn't have. And so that's kind of my main focus, right? I feel like it was a gift that my parents forced me to learn Hindi, and in retrospect, I'm so happy. But I think knowing her language is going to be that first step to help her form that deeper bond and have that appreciation for who she is.
Yeah. And I think this is independent of where you grow up. I will say that, it took me as a person, I moved around quite a bit in India, even when I was growing up. So I think to get that feeling of associating roots or being proud of where you come from or being able to share that with the world takes time unless you see representation. I grew up in a very small community, which I saw the community, but I definitely didn't see enough representation. And I think that matters to a child, because you need to be able to see yourself somewhere in order to say that it's possible. Like I can be a writer because I see someone like Shachi who sounds like me, who looks like me, or who has a perspective which I know about at home. So they don't need to code switch. Because I think, how a lot of the kids here that I talk to when we are doing workshops, kids will be, they would have heard something. I remember going for a Holi workshop, which we did in a school here. And, there were children who had heard about it, who were South Asian in their homes, but they didn't open their mouth. The questions I was getting was from kids who had never heard of the festival, who were super excited. And when they saw that their friends are super excited, then these kids started opening up also, because suddenly they saw that it's okay to talk about something they don't actually celebrate at school, but celebrate only at home. And that was a very unique moment for me to realize that, they need that push. They need to be told that this is amazing and you do something, this is very cool. And, your friends are appreciating it. So they could talk about those things more openly as well. So it is an experience I see even now, let alone 80s and 90s. I don't even, we didn't even have any representation here, especially. Even the books that people grew up in India, unless you were reading regional literature, it was very much British. And so there were no characters that had names like us. I mean, I can speak about this for a while because I think I'm definitely like, I took me a while to understand that my lead character does not need to be named Ben, because somehow in my head I was like, Ben and Jessica are my top lead characters, which doesn't need to be the case. Shachi, tell us, like, when you meet parents and they have their kids participate in events, what are some of the things you hear? Like, what do they need? Like, what is a parental need that you hear as you create more resources for them?
They obviously want their kid to learn Hindi,
Mm-hmm.
but I always tell them it's something that should come from within for the child. And sorry, pressurizing the kid just to learn the language isn't going to help. So you need to be a part of those activities if you want your kid to learn it. You just cannot send them to a school to learn Hindi because you want them to learn it. It should come from there within that. Okay, my mom is speaking a language that I cannot understand. I wish I could communicate with them in this language. I wish mom is watching this television show and she likes this kind of music. I wish I could have understood this. So maybe trying to sit down with your child first and telling them what things they can do if they know the extra language, instead of just saying, I wish that my kid could speak Hindi. That's something I've really heard from parents, especially the South Asian parent who come to these events, and they would be like, if you have anything that can help them learn Hindi. But the first thing is they can learn Hindi only if you interact with them. If you speak to them little words of Hindi, try incorporating it in Hindi. So I think that's the first step. Rather than looking for resources outside, you should find resources inside the house.
I agree with that, and I completely fail at it. I'll tell you, like, I don't speak a word of like my mother tongue with my child. There are a few words I'll speak here and there if I'm talking to my parents, but it's hard to do. Like, it's just because I feel overwhelmed as a parent. I feel like I have so many things to teach. Like, you just went from potty training to whatever training. Like, there's a lot happening. Tell us, like, tell us a success story, because I want to start feeling different, that this is possible and feasible. So I'm going to go to Dushyant. Tell us something that you feel really happy about that you were able to teach your child.
Yeah, recently, super happy. There's a song in Marathi called Hi Chal Turu Turu. It's a very popular song, maybe not so popular in this panel, but for those who grew up in Maharashtra, it's like #1 favorite song. And my dad had a habit of singing songs to us when we were growing up, and I cannot sing for nuts, but somehow to cope with these sleepless nights, I used to either sing Ashiki songs or Chal Turu Turu. And 2-3 years later, for some magical reason, my son is just like, he doesn't understand the words, but he knows the tune, and he just makes up his own words, and it's the cutest thing. So I'm actually thinking that could be the inspiration for the next book. And maybe take some of the inspiration from you, Balveen, where you can have the Marathi text or the Devanagari text, but the English words, and then there's a song attached to it, right? The kids love songs. So very positive experience that if you keep at it, if you don't really, the goal isn't to teach, but the goal is to have fun. Somehow the learning actually just happens automatically.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and songs is a way, like I have a language which is not written. I speak Kashmiri, which doesn't have a script from the language that I speak in my community. So the only way we've learned is through songs or by talking. So it's very orally transmitted. And hopefully that's what would help, like if you do something like a fun activity with a child. Is that what you do, Balveen, as well with your daughter?
Yeah, I think what I call it is having like my bilingual toolkit. So books are kind of central. I think I agree with what Shachi was saying. Like my number one advice to all parents is start reading to them from day one, from right when you bring them home from the hospital, and make reading a part of your routine, because now my daughter seeks it out. She wants to read books. She picks that instead of other activities that I want her to limit her on. So yeah, books is key. Music is key. Games. In the car when we're driving, I'm always looking for Hindi songs to play in the car as well. And then media, right? Videos and movies and things like that. So, because especially at the toddler age, they have different moods. Sometimes they're in the mood for reading, sometimes they're not. So it's for me, it's been important to, have things available, a song, a book, a movie available, depending on what the mood is and what she wants to consume. And then I totally agree. It's play based. Like, I think that our idea of like this academic setting, sitting in the classroom, it does not, it's so much harder for adults probably to learn language that way as well. If language learning was more play-based, even for adults, I think that we would have more folks speaking multiple languages. So incorporating it into play, being outside, being in a sandbox in a playground, like those are all opportunities to bring language learning into whatever you're doing. So yeah, keeping it fun, keeping it play-based is key.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's very similar to, we've had parenting coaches on this panel who literally said the exact same thing that you guys are all saying, that how do you like associate play or activity with teaching anything about culture or including languages. I mean, I've tried to learn languages as an adult and failed because it was so academic. And I know how hard that can be for a child because they're already processing so much more around them. And so an activity is definitely like a takeaway that I take, and I think it does help kids as well. So, we had a slight detour where Dushyant was sort of saying what his next book could be. So I'm actually going to go around the table and ask you what your new projects are. Shachi, I'm going to begin with you. What's a new project that you're working on that we should all get excited about?
So I've been working on 2-3 projects at the same time. So there's this manuscript that I've been working on, which I need to trim down for my agent. She likes the story, but the word count is a lot. So I need to trim on that. But my books are generally representing the South Asian culture and how it can help kids feel that, yeah, they should be proud of where their parents come from. And they should feel that it's okay if they're different in their own ways. And this won't be only for the South Asian culture, but for overall kids, it's okay if you have different qualities. Not everybody has to be the same.
Yeah, and that's such a nice, I was very happy. This is like one of my yearly parenting wins, I would say, that my son recently said, it's okay if I don't like the same things as Baba, because, I can be different. Somehow he internalized that, God knows how, but I was like, oh my goodness, this is so good if he feels that he doesn't have to have the same likes or he can be different. And my hope is that more kids internalize that feeling at a young age and feel proud of being different or whatever else might make them not exactly the same as their friends. Dushyant, I'm going to go to you. What is next that we should be expecting as readers?
Given that it's just literally fresh off the printing presses, before I talk about it, I want to talk a little about this book. I like the fact that it's also a keepsake. It's got a journaling aspect to it. So there's seasons of the year. Of course, it's based around the pandemic, but there's seasons of the year, there's calendars. So I hope kids love reading that, and I hope parents love reading them to the kids as well. And my personal new project is to teach my 4-year-old how to ride a bike, because that, I think, is number one on my swimming and biking. Those two, I would choose them over languages at this point.
That is true. It's also tiring so that the child can have a good night's sleep. So I definitely recommend parent recommendation there. And Balveen, what's coming up from your desk next?
Well, I did want to start with my main goal is potty training. That is, I hope, yeah, it's hit or miss right now. So really focusing on that. But my book Chalo Jungle Chalein, it's in Hindi. I hope to translate it into Punjabi and Gujarati as well. And then I'm also already have my idea for my next book as well. The key theme of my current book and future books is all around building this connection to nature. For me, being outside and learning about the world around you was kind of such a great part of my childhood and my adulthood. So hope to my next book to kind of follow that theme as well.
Yeah, I love that. And, kids love themes like this. I was already thinking that we love taking kids to zoos and, it's so good to have a book like Chalo Jungle Chalein just to sort of give them new language around what they might be seeing or experiencing. So definitely recommend from a parenting perspective as well. And keep at the potty training. I would say that we just went through it and I'm like, thank God, there is like, it's a huge relief when it does happen and you will reach there. So all the best for that.
Thank you.
I love this discussion for a couple of reasons. One, because, we get to learn what new projects you guys are doing. And, as readers and as we start recommending books out to our community, these are the kinds of books that we would love to offer. We always get parents asking us what book should they read. And so this is definitely one way for us to know what is happening within our communities and what's the new work coming out. And secondly, because I think, I think this is almost like a resource and a circle for parents who sometimes don't feel that, we feel too often that we are in this alone, and to hear perspectives and like be able to nod and say, okay, I feel the same way. It's really empowering to parents, especially of young kids who are experiencing this for the first time, for them to know that, it'll be okay, or you'll have your wins and sometimes not, but you have to keep at it. And it's an experience that is rewarding in the end, if that's how you like to think about it, because some days are bad, and even to acknowledge that is important. But it's nice to have this different group of people talk about similar topics and validate some of the feelings other parents might be having as well. So I know that we always keep a timing of an hour, but I will ask you guys if you have any final tips for parents to sort of share with us on what would you tell a fellow parent who could be in a similar situation or a different situation. So let me go around the table. Let me start, Dushyant. What's a tip for a parent?
I don't think I'm qualified to give any tips to any parents at this point, given my track record. But I would say, do what your parents have done, and it usually works. And then I'm looking forward to spending more time outdoors. I always feel like we connect more with activities. So just that tip that we had discussed before, all this around a certain activity is more effective than just the goal itself. So yeah, but I feel very humble being asked for tips. Thank you, Pers.
Balveen?
I will say for language learning, something that I keep on reminding myself is it's a lifelong journey. So as an adult, I'm still on the journey myself. And I think that for when I first started, first my daughter was born, I felt a huge weight on my shoulders because I thought I need to make her be fluent in Hindi or I have failed. And that's not the case. My job is to develop a positive association for her and the language. And then ultimately it's going to be her decision whether to continue learning or not. And so that's what when those days, right, when we kind of regress a little bit, it's the journey is up and down and sideways and the other way, but it's lifelong. So definitely don't be discouraged if you don't feel like you're making progress.
I love that. I love that, because I wanted to hear that as a parent as well, that it's an up and down sideways journey. It's never a straight line. And Shachi, what do you have to say to all the parents and kids out there?
So I'm not a parent yet, so I don't have any tips for parents. But for kids, I would just say, just go have fun, explore different cultures, different food, different festivals, and it'll just be good for them, and they'll be able to associate why things happen in that particular way and why people eat different foods. They'll be able to understand it better.
Yeah, I love that. And, I don't want to, Shachi, when she was here, she joined us on the call. She's like, I'm not a parent. She said that to me even before, and I knew that. But I want to acknowledge the fact that there are so many people who come together like a village to actually raise a child. And so, I know the work Shachi does, which is very consciously I brought her in, because there is a perspective you get outside in from someone who's not in the same situation that you are. So Shachi, hopefully that your work inspires lots of parents and kids. And that's exactly why, it's helpful to have you here as well, because as parents, at least I can tell you about personally myself, like you get stuck in situations and you feel that is like the days are just long, and it feels like there is no out. And so to get outside of our own heads sometimes, to get different perspectives, is super helpful. That's probably why they say like it takes a village to raise a kid. And hopefully the community that we are creating can help parents get those positive associations or empowering messages that can help them in their own journey. Of course, every child is different, every parent is different, so it's like it's not that what we say is going to work for everyone, but it's helpful to sort of think positively and be able to try what works for your own child or your own communities. So this is basically the end of it. I will stop recording now in a moment, but I do want to, before I do that, thank all of you guys to take time out from a working day, especially right after a holiday when it always feels like the world is attacking us. And I appreciate it.